In breathing, grace may twofold be. We breathe air in, we set it free. The in-breath binds, the out unwinds, and thus with marvels life entwines. Then thanks to God when we are pressed, and thank Him when He gives us rest. Bring your attention to your breath for a moment. You may find that you have forgotten that you are even breathing. But however shallow or infrequent, your breath is a continuous reminder of all that exists in your embeddedness within life itself. As Anaximenes once said, just as our suche, being air, holds us together, so does wind or air enclose the whole cosmos. Heraclitus' fragment 7 says, Ai panta ta onta, kapnos genoito, rines an diagnoien. And of all things became smoke, the nostrils would discern or distinguish them. Much ink has been spilled in the attempt to elucidate this enigmatic fragment of Heraclitus's. And yet, whatever explanation you may encounter, it is without question that this fragment draws a firm link between perception and the sense of smell. According to ancient physiologists and the Hippocratics, the nose, the ris, technically extended not simply to the outer proboscis, that protruding organ on our faces, but also extended into the brain, the throat, the eyes, and the ear canals. The nose, therefore, was a complex of cavities and orifices, and it was considered fundamentally to be a gateway to the soul. As Heraclitus would have it, the soul is composed of fire, and the act of inhalation brings in the surrounding fiery elements and maintains the soul's vitality. And if water means death for a fiery soul, as he states in another fragment, then obviously this produces smoke. But smoke is an indication not only of the death of the suke of the mortal being, but also precisely that point of contact where the presence of the gods are felt. For it is precisely this incorporeal, smoky or steamy byproduct of sacrifice in the form of knise that the gods demand in their feasting. Although not adopting my specific Heraclitean analysis, Clements, in the article entitled Divine Sense and Presence, confirms the relationship between the odors of sacrifice and the calling up of the gods, fundamentally arguing that in some sense aromas, as disembodied things, maintain an equivalence or homoia of the gods themselves who are attracted to those particular scents. The article mentions that Heraclitus considered each individual scent to be a distinct manifestation of the divinity that is mixed with it. The smell of a burnt offering is therefore the thing itself, but transformed through a process of dephysicalization, so that what the gods consume is not simply the smell of the offering, but the essence of the object offered, which is converted into another mode. As Clements remarks, smell is what we perceive in, and as a form of breath, smell is intimately linked with the inhalation and exhalation that is essential for our very existence. Scent, and by association breath, is therefore an intimate and immediate mode of communication between ourselves and the gods. The gods' presence in an environment can be detected by the smell of incense and other divine perfumes, and their scented presence was referred to as augoeides. And in ancient Egypt, the burning of incense was also equated not simply with a sacrifice, but as an indication that the gods were present to the rites. But this sense of smoke and aromas arising from the sacrificial altar present a very one-sided view of the interaction and exchange of scented breath. As many of us undoubtedly know, the gods consume a substance called ambrosia, which also acts as an oily substance that is applied to the skin to rejuvenate it and infuse it with a vitality. And ambrotos literally translates to not mortal. An example can be found in the hymn to Aphrodite. At the time he, Anchises, was herding cattle at the steep peaks of Mount Ida, famous for its many springs, To look at him and the way he was shaped was like looking at the immortals. When Aphrodite, lover of smiles, saw him, she fell in love with him. A terrible desire seized her in her phrenes. She went to Cyprus, entering her temple fragrant with incense, to Paphos. That is where her sacred precinct is, and her altar fragrant with incense. She went in and closed the shining doors. Then the Charites, the Graces, bathed her and anointed her with oil, the kind that gives immortality, glistening on the complexion of the gods who last for all time. Immortal it was, giver of pleasures, and had the fragrance of incense. This, quote, fragrance of incense that Ambrosia possesses is also linked to breath, when in Odyssey, Book 4, it is said, "She brought and placed ambrosia of a very sweet breath beneath each man's nose, and destroyed the stench of the beast." As a substance that remains in an indeterminate state between fragrant smell or breath, or a cream-like consistency bordering on the liquid and the solid, ambrosia hovers between one state and another, and provides a means of ceasing the relentless continuation of time from one temporal moment to the next, and thereby functions as a substance of immortality. But most importantly, it is through the pores, either of the skin or the nostrils, that this substance of immortality can be conveyed to the human being. Those porous openings that allow communication between the outside and the inside. In a wonderfully exciting counterintuitive etymological analysis, Clements suggests that the Greek word noein, meaning to recognize, could originally have meant to sniff. Similarly, the Thumos, which is translated as spirit or passion, could once have been indicative of something perceptible by the sense of smell. It is therefore no surprise, then, that we find in the psychophysiology of Homer the Thumos located in staphesi, in the breast or in the chest. Gregory Nagy also identifies the root of nous in the word nes, which means return home. In this sense, we can see the Greek noun nostos, which can be found in the English word nostalgia. And this nes can also mean return to light and life. The Thumos spirit is a very complicated phenomenon because it is both a localization within the material body, but also the organ responsible for a host of disparate emotional and cognitive functions, including feeling, reflecting, willing, thinking, and a general sense of awareness. Thumos is typically depicted as a form of gas, or a billowy aerial substance, and it becomes thumos when it is breathed deeply into the lungs and enters the phrenes or papides, variously understood as both the lowest portion of the lungs and or in and around the diaphragm. Nagy outlines how thumos resonates on multiple levels, not only within the physical body as a spirit or anima, but also in the natural world, where he describes a derivative thuno, meaning a violent surging of winds, waters, air, and fluids. Other words include thumiao, make to smoke, thuo, in the participle tethuomeon, to mean anointed or fragrant, and the adjectives like thuees, which refer to rising of smells into air in the context of a sacrifice, which also is etymologically related to thuo, I sacrifice. Nagy offers a number of examples where thumos is associated both with the psychological state of a person and the turbulent phenomena of the natural world. Thunegar pedion potamo plethonte eokos kaimaro os de oka reon eketasse gefuras. For he stormed across the plain like unto a winter torrent though full, that with its swift flood sweeps away the embankments. Or in another passage, and the winds went back again to return to their home over the Thracian sea, and it roared with surging flood. The word anemoi in the last sentence indicates a crucial link between the world of humans and the world of the divinities. The anemoi are the winds, where in Latin we understand the term animus or spirit, and in this sense human breathing is linked to the surrounding winds in our atmosphere. But anamoi is also a term used to speak of the spirits of ancestors. When we breathe, or are reminded to breathe, the ancestors are pervading our entire being, and the identity of what reminds us to breathe in and to continue living, Nagy suggests, lies in this word animos, which is an animating of breath, related to the root word men, meaning mind. This root is where we derive the word in Greek for power, which is menos. So spake he, and into the other's heart flashing-eyed Athene breathed might, and he fell to slaving on this side and on that. And from them uprose hideous groaning as they were smitten with the sword, and the earth grew red with blood. What is being suggested here is that menos is a reminding executed by the divinity. The god reminds the mortal to breathe, reminds the wind to blow. Just as in the beginning of this video you were reminded to breathe, although it may seem that it was my words that prompted that conscious deep inhalation, it was in fact a god, because gods, and in particular Athena, has already been linked with breathing in menos into a mortal. Another example can be found in Odyssey Book 1. In his Thumos she had put menos and daring, and she had reminded him of his father more than before. In order to drive the point home further, Athena, having reminded Hupemnesen of his father, assumes the form of a hero by the name of Mentis, which Nagy translates as the reminder. In order to understand the nature of Thumos, it is important to get a sense of what kind of breath or movement of air it is. The best analogy we can make is when we speak in English of a spirited person. This spiritedness can be encapsulated both physically and mentally, and so with Thumos, the type of breath that it signifies is one of active, self-propelling movement, often characterized by warriors who exert themselves in battle, and thinkers who may be overcome by powerful ideas and thoughts like winds that blow us in whichever direction. Not only are the acts of inhalation and exhalation important for the maintenance and continuance of our vital being, but these processes also connect the interior with the exterior, the microcosm with the macrocosm, allowing for a fundamental breach of the border through our mouth and nostrils, those gateways to the soul, to communicate with the forces inhabiting the external and internal worlds. I have not come across much in the literature on theurgy that seeks to explain how the luminous vehicle, the augoeides, is related to the pneuma-ochema. Are these two separate vehicles or a singular vehicle? Do they serve two different purposes or a singular purpose? I do not necessarily want to make a bold assertion one way or the other. I simply want to draw a few observations regarding the overlap between breath and wind and light. A frequently observed technique is found both in the Mithras liturgy and the Theurgy of Iamblichus and the Chaldean oracles. The excerpt from line 537 of the Mithras liturgy informs the initiate, quote, "Draw in breath from the rays, drawing up 3 times as much as you can, and you will see yourself being lifted up and ascending to the height, so that you seem to be in mid-air. You will hear nothing either of man or of any other living thing, nor in that hour will you see anything of mortal affairs on earth, but rather you will see all immortal things." There isn't much description to this technique besides draw in breath from the rays, but if you've woken in the early hours of the morning when the dew has yet to be evaporated from the fields and the earth, you will notice the sun's rays slowly eating up and absorbing the moisture through the same gaseous billowy substance we referred to earlier. These rays and their spirit have been identified as Vishnu. This notion of eating the object that exudes the breath and moisture into the atmosphere is actually found in Upanishidic conceptualizations, according to Gordon White. The rays of the sun or of the inner self are not only touching or grasping their objects, he says, they are actually penetrating, eating, or possessing their objects. Similarly, anguloi cause the soul to ascend by illuminating it with fire. Julian says the anguloi are under the control of Helios, thereby separating soul from the material world by making it less dense with its warm breath, the pneuma-ochema. Besides this, the drawing in of breath from the rays, of course, involves a form of movement, and I believe, once again, certain Rigvedic and Upanishidic articulations can be helpful, since there has been a tremendous amount of literature from India that differentiate and categorize the different types of breath in the body based on their directionality of movement and their function. In 1901, A.H. Ewing published a work entitled The Hindu Conception of the Functions of Breath, a study in early Hindu psychophysics. I pulled this book from my shelf and found that the definitions, like many Homeric words involving psychophysiological phenomena, were incredibly variable. There was no consistent definition across traditions. But I did find that the Maitri Upanishad seems to indicate a pneumatic vehicle of sorts. The 5 prana series in order is prana, which is in-breath, vyana, apana, which is out-breath, samana, and the udana. 5 breaths correspond to 5 movements that are arranged in such a fashion described as an altar made of bricks that form the image of a bird. They correspond respectively to the bird's head, the higher wing, the tail, the back, and the lower wing. We can only imagine that the fundamental goal is some sort of vehicle for ascent. The Vedanta Sara defines each of the 5 breaths or winds. Prana is the breath which goes forward and has the tip of the nose as its place of activity. Apana is the breath which goes downward and has the anus as its place of activity. Vyana is the breath which goes in all directions and has the entire body as its place of activity. Udana is the breath which has its place in the throat, goes upward, and is the departing wind, the wind that departs with life. Samana is the breath which produces the assimilation of that food, which having been eaten and drunk has gone into the midst of the body. Similar to the later articulations of the classical Upanishads of India in the 3rd to 4th century CE, the external solar winds become located within the recesses of the human body as the 7 inner breaths. These solar winds correspond to the solar rays emitted by the visible sun, Savitr, and upon death, the Rigveda states that the fire of Agni will cremate the dead and facilitate the communion with the sun. Quote, "May the eye go to the sun and the breath to the wind." Additionally, we can see the wind being linked to the sun in Rigveda. Sun, the breath of everything moving and unmoving. In pre-Socratic thought, in opposition to later Platonic conceptualizations, there is a strong emphasis in cosmic hospitality. In Empedocles, we see how hospitality helps to create and establish the cosmic order. And through his cosmological breathing exercises, it becomes clear that an aperture or an opening must be established in the human body and maintained for forces of the stranger, who is protected and embodied as a principle of Zeus Xenios to enter. For a further elaboration of the importance of cosmic hospitality, please refer to an older video created, entitled appropriately enough, Cosmic Hospitality. But in Empedocles' cosmic physiology, as one of the roots or rhizomes, Zeus represents the element of air, and therefore it is the breath that enters and withdraws our own bodily home that allows for the continuation and sustainment of life. The 4 elements are mixed into the blood, because the ancients early on realized that when respiration occurs, the air is brought into the body and mingles with the blood. So there is a continuity between breath, air, and blood, including all the connotations and associations we've previously discussed with light. Light, breath, mind, and spirit are all interlinked. In Empedoclean physiology, the 4 elements in the blood revolve around the heart, and I believe that it is the rotation and circular movement that the blood and the elements undergo that creates the emergence of spirit. It is no surprise that Empedocles would have seen the function of the heart in this way, since he adopted many Pythagorean precepts, similar to Alcmaeon of Croton, who speaks of vital pneuma circulating in the arteries. According to the religious text located on the Shabaka stone from ancient Egypt, which is dated to 2400 BCE, it is written that, quote, Ptah conceives the world by the thought of his heart and gives life through the magic of his word. As emanations of Atum, Horus is often identified with the heart and Thoth with the tongue. It is also said in another Egyptian ritualistic text that, quote, "The gods form the sight of the eyes, the hearing of the ears, the smelling of the nose, that they might furnish," which literally means to send up, "the desire of the heart." Since the heart is the organ of perception and the tongue the means by which the desire of the heart is made manifest in the world through speech, it can be understood, according to Empedocles, that the four elements in the moving blood are responsible for ultimate perception, and that thought emerges from the divinely composed body, but only on the condition that the body welcomes in the stranger. That is nature, or physis, or the world. The mind is not separate from the body, because as we have seen, there are ways in which the gods instill us with mind or manas or menos every moment we consciously breathe. But unfortunately, beginning with Plato, we start to see the body conceptualized as the host of the soul, sometimes even seen as a prison. But for the pre-Socratics like Empedocles, nature itself is the ultimate stranger, or xenos, that must be continually invited as a stranger into the home of our bodies. We can see echoes of Empedoclean teachings in the alchemy of Ibn Umayl, where alchemy becomes the process of extraction of the fire or psychic energy from the body. We do not have to get into the details of Ibn Umayl's alchemical theories, but it is important to note that soul, as a life impulse, was equated not only with fire, but with blood, and hence desire, thus bringing it close to the domain of Iblis, the Islamic equivalent of the devil. According to the Quran, he is born out of fire and stays in the blood. Quote, Anas ibn Malik reported, "The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, said, 'Verily, Satan flows through the human being like the flowing of blood.'" If anything, this speaks to the daimonic power inherent within the life substance of blood. According to Empedocles, when we inhale or breathe in, Aphrodite draws in the four elements into the center of our body. Just as love rules over the blood, air is associated with strife. So that when we've inhaled to the fullest extent, all the blood withdraws to the heart, and at that point the sphiros is formed, whereby all elements lose their individuality, until at last through exhalation the blood expands from the heart to the surface of the body, which pushes the air through the pores of the skin. And as strife is pushed to the circumference, love's sphiros or sphere expands until it once again contracts upon the next inhalation. We can hear echoes of Pythagorean cosmogony through the evocation of the One, imagined in this instance as a world seed that divides and grows simultaneously as it inhales breath from the void. Strife in the Empedoclean cosmology is always the stranger that enters in upon love's domain and divides the elements. This division of elements, and hence the destruction that strife entails, has always led scholars to assume that Empedocles finds strife as the embodiment of evil. But when the xenos is invited, in this case strife, also known as nekos, their presence fundamentally renews all bonds and limits. It prevents the imprisonment and tyranny of the same, that is, love's sphere, by introducing the different. This eruption, or let us say disruption, of love's tyranny over the four elements and hence the four divinities of hospitality, earth, air, water, fire, allow the cosmic order to be established, since it is always the stranger or the guest who brings the potential for violence through their intrusion. Once again, it is this intrusion that renews the cosmos. In this sense, we can reread Cavafy's poem, Waiting for the Barbarians, and make sense of the final portion. Why this sudden unrest and confusion? How solemn their faces have become. Why are the streets and squares clearing quickly, and all return to their homes so deep in thought? Because night is here, but the barbarians have not come. Some people arrived from the frontiers, and they said that there are no longer any barbarians. And now what shall become of us without any barbarians? Those people were a kind of solution. Empedocles speaks of a clepsydra as an illustration of the process of respiration, We can refer to the commentary on Empedocles' notion of respiration written by Aetius, who says, quote, "Exhalation occurs as the air retreats, when the blood moves to the surface and by its ducts drives the air through the rhinon," which can mean either nostrils or skin. Inhalation occurs when the blood runs back and air enters the fissures left by the blood on its withdrawal. The precise meaning of the rhinon can indicate either nostrils or skin, but considering extensive scholarly debate and the image of the clepsydra as evidence with its porous openings, it seems to suggest that the pores of the skin are mainly involved. In this sense, embryonic breathing, and in extension, adult human breathing, directly corresponds and mirrors not only the breathing of the cosmos, but also the formation of the entire universe. We cannot get into too much detail regarding this process here, but let it suffice that this mystical process of breathing is a critical form of later theurgic practice, for as the Indian yogis were to discover later, the realization or cosmification of the human being is simultaneously an act of deification. Take care for now.